welcome. Thanks so much for being here. If this goes right, this is going to be Anne of Green Gables, Morrowind, Elder Scrolls, and Final Fantasy IV. Again, thank you so much for being here. Wish us luck. Begin by simply listening. Slow down and see just how peaceful today can be.
This is funny. I don't know where to begin. Do you love me or not?
I love you. I mean, I don't.
Don't?
Well, it's totally subjective, really. What is one's definition of love? Is it a many splendored thing?
Peter, we can't go on like this anymore. I have to know something. Smooch me.
You want me to smooch you?
Just one smooch.
Spider sense is tingling. That means danger's near. You okay?
I'm okay. My God.
Peter Parker, find Spider-Man for me, or I'll eat her liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
You want Spider-Man? You can have me! There they are. MJ, I'll save you.
Save yourself, Spider-Man.
Whoa! I think you of all people should have been taught to keep your hands to yourself.
You're no match for me, wall crawler.
Oh.
Wake up. You're about to become the latest victim of the arms of Dr. Octopus.
So nice to get a hug. He's not kidding. If I don't get free soon...
Stop it! You're killing him!
Ben? What are you doing here? Hello? What does it matter? Would you have liked this? For me to be responsible, to put others before myself? Here I am, using my powers for good, and I have never once told Mary Jane, the most wonderful girl in existence, that she means everything to me. She's so beautiful. No! This can't be happening. I can't die now. Not like this. Uncle Ben, I'm sorry, but if this is what responsibility is, I want no part of it. Not anymore. Protecting others is fine, but in doing so, I can no longer make a sad mockery of my own life. I must tell her, even if the cops are uncertain.
You might want to say a final farewell to your arachnid friend, who won't last much longer. Impossible! No man on earth is strong enough to escape my steel grasp. No matter. Killing you will
Sorry,
save
Doctor, but your plans end here and now. Ah! Are you okay? It's important that Peter wanted to tell you.
Oh?
Stuff that he had to keep a secret, but he can't anymore.
And he told you this.
I am...
No.
Sorry, Doctor, but your plans end here and now. Sure. Waving. No, there's one thing. Shut up. Ah! Oh, you...
Chapter 31 of Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 31, Where the Brook and River Meet. Anne had her She and Diana fairly lived outdoors, reveling in all the delights that Lover's Lane and the Dryad's Bubble and Willowmere and Victoria Island afforded. Marilla offered no objections to Anne's gypsyings. The Spencervale doctor, who had come the night Minnie May had the croup, met Anne at the house of a patient one afternoon early in vacation, looked her over sharply, screwed up his mouth, shook his head, and sent a message to Marilla Cuthbert by another person. It was,
"Keep that red-headed girl of yours in the open air all summer, and don't let her read books until she gets more spring into her step."
This message frightened Marilla wholesomely. She read Anne's death warrant by consumption in it, unless it was scrupulously obeyed. As a result, Anne had the golden summer of her life as far as freedom and frolic went. She walked, rode, berried, and dreamed to her heart's content. And when September came, she was bright-eyed and alert, with a step that would have satisfied the Spencervale doctor, and a heart full of ambition and zest once more. "I feel just like studying with might and main," she declared as she brought her books down from the attic. "Oh, you good old friends. I'm glad to see your honest faces once more. Yes, even you, geometry. I've had a perfectly beautiful summer, Marilla, and now I'm rejoicing as a strong man to run a race, as Mr. Allen said last Sunday. Doesn't Mr. Allen preach magnificent sermons? Mrs. Lynde says he is improving every day, and the first thing we know some city church will gobble him up, and then we'll be left and have to turn to and break in another green preacher. But I don't see the use of meeting trouble halfway, do you, Marilla? I think it would be better just to enjoy Mr. Allen while we have him. If I were a man, I think I'd be a minister. They can have such an influence for good if their theology is sound. and it must be thrilling to preach splendid sermons and stir your hearers' hearts. Why can't women be ministers, Marilla? I asked Mrs. Lynde that, and she was shocked and said it would be a scandalous thing. She said there might be female ministers in the state. Believed there was, but thank goodness we hadn't got to that stage in Canada yet, and she hoped we never would. But I don't see why. I think women would make splendid ministers. When there is a social to be got up, or a church tea, or anything else to raise money, the women have to turn to and do the work. I'm sure Mrs. Lynde can pray every bit as well as Superintendent Bell, and I've no doubt she could preach too with a little practice.
Yes, I believe she could,
Said Marilla dryly.
She does plenty of unofficial preaching as it is. Nobody has much of a chance to go wrong in Avonlea with Rachel to oversee them.
Marilla, said Anne in a burst of confidence, I want to tell you something and ask you what you think about it. It has worried me terribly. On Sunday afternoons, that is, when I think specially about such matters. I do really want to be good, and when I'm with you or Mrs. Allen or Miss Stacy, I want it more than ever, and I want to do just what would please you and what you would approve of. But mostly when I'm with Mrs. Lynde, I feel desperately wicked, and as if I wanted to go and do the very thing she tells me I oughtn't to do. I feel irresistibly tempted to do it. Now, what do you think is the reason I feel like that? Do you think it's because I'm really bad and unregenerate? Marilla looked dubious for a moment. Then she laughed.
If you are, I guess I am too, Anne, for Rachel often has that very effect on me. I sometimes think she'd have more of an influence for good, as you say yourself, if she didn't keep nagging people to do right. There should have been a special commandment against nagging. But there, I shouldn't talk so. Rachel is a good Christian woman, and she means well. There isn't a kinder soul in Avonlea, and she never shirks her share of work.
I'm very glad you feel the same, said Anne decidedly. It's so encouraging. I shan't worry so much of that after this. But I dare say there'll be other things to worry me. They keep coming up new all the time. Things to perplex you, you know. You settle one question and there's another right after. There are so many things to be thought over and decided when you're beginning to grow up. It keeps me busy all the time thinking them over and deciding what is right. It's a serious thing to grow up, isn't it, Marilla? But when I have such good friends as you and Matthew and Mrs. Allen and Miss Stacy, I ought to grow up successfully, and I'm sure it will be my own fault if I don't. I feel it's a great responsibility because I have only the one chance. If I don't grow up right, I can't go back and begin over again. I've grown 2 inches this summer, Marilla. Mr. Gillis measured me at Ruby's party. I'm so glad you made my new dresses longer. That dark green one is so pretty, and it was sweet of you to put on the flounce. Of course I know it wasn't really necessary. The flounces are so stylish this fall, and Josie Pye has flounces on all her dresses. I know I'll be able to study better because of mine. I shall have such a comfortable feeling deep down in my mind about that flounce.
It's worth something to have that,
Admitted Marilla. Miss Stacy came back to Avonlea School and found all her pupils eager for work once more. Especially did the Queen's class gird up their loins for the fray, for at the end of the coming year, dimly shadowing their pathway already, loomed up that fateful thing known as the entrance, at the thought of which one and all felt their hearts sink into their very shoes. Suppose they did not pass? That thought was doomed to haunt Anne through the waking hours of that winter, Sunday afternoons inclusive, to the almost entire exclusion of moral and theological problems. When Anne had bad dreams, she found herself staring miserably at pass lists of the entrance exams, where Gilbert Blythe's name was blazoned at the top, and in which hers did not appear at all. But it was a jolly, busy, happy, swift-flying winter. Schoolwork was as interesting, class rivalry as absorbing as of yore. New worlds of thought, feeling, and ambition, fresh, fascinating fields of unexplored knowledge seemed to be opening out before Anne's eager eyes. Hills heaped o'er hill, and Alps on Alps arose. Much of all this was due to Miss Stacy's tactful, careful, broad-minded guidance. She led her class to think and explore and discover for themselves, and encouraged straying from the old beaten paths to a degree that quite shocked Mrs. Lynde and the school trustees, who viewed all innovations on established methods rather dubiously. Apart from her studies, Anne expanded socially. For Marilla, mindful of the Spencervale doctor's dictum, no longer vetoed occasional
I have
outings.
taken you from
The debating club flourished and gave several concerts.
First
There
by
were one or
carriage,
two
and
parties
now by
almost
boat.
verging on grown-up affairs.
To the east,
There were sleigh drives and
tomorrow.
skating frolics galore.
Fear not.
Between
for I am
times, Anne
watchful.
grew, shooting up
You
so rapidly that
chose.
Marilla was astonished one day, when they were standing side by side, to find the girl was taller than herself.
Why, Anne, how you've grown.
We're here.
She said, almost
Why are you
unbelievingly.
shaking?
A sigh followed on
okay?
the words.
Wake up.
Marilla felt a queer regret over Anne's inches.
Stand up.
The child she had learned to love had vanished
Which way?
somehow. And here was this
What's your
tall,
name?
serious-eyed girl of 15, with the thoughtful brows and the proudly poised little head, in her place. Marilla loved the girl as much as she had loved the child, but she was conscious of a queer, sorrowful sense of loss. And that night, when Anne had gone to prayer meeting with Diana, Marilla sat alone in the wintry twilight and indulged in the weakness of a cry. Matthew, coming in with a lantern, caught her at it, and gazed at her in such consternation that Marilla had to laugh through her tears.
I was thinking about Anne.
She explained.
She's got to be such a big girl, and she'll probably be away from us next winter.
Well, not even last
It's
night's
terrible.
storm could wake you. She'll be able to come home after we reach tomorrow.
Comforted Matthew,
I'm sure the
to whom Anne was as yet and always would be the little eager girl he had
Quiet.
brought home from Bright
Here comes
River
the car.
on that June evening
This
4
is
years
where we
before.
get off. The branch railroad will be built to Carmody by that time.
It won't be the same thing as having her here all the time.
Sighed Marilla gloomily, determined to enjoy her luxury of grief uncomforted.
But there, men can't understand these things.
There were other changes in Anne no less real than the physical change. For one thing, she became much quieter. Perhaps she thought all the more and dreamed as much as ever, but she certainly talked less. Marilla noticed and commented on this also.
You don't chatter half as much as you used to, Anne, nor use half as many big words. What has come over you?
Anne colored and laughed a little as she dropped her book and looked dreamily out of the window, where big, fat red buds were bursting out on the creeper in response to the lure of the spring sunshine. I don't know. I don't want to talk as much, she said, denting her chin thoughtfully with her forefinger. It's nicer to think dear, pretty thoughts and keep them in one's heart, like treasures. I don't like to have them laughed at or wondered over. And somehow I don't want to use big words anymore. It's almost a pity, isn't it? Now that I'm really growing big enough to say them if I did want to. It's fun to be almost grown up in some ways, but it's not the kind of fun I expected, Marilla. There's so much to learn and do and think that there isn't time for big words. Besides, Miss Stacy says the short ones are much stronger and better. She makes us write all our essays as simply as possible. It was hard at first. I was so used to crowding in all the fine, big words I could think of, and I thought of any number of them. But I've got used to it now, and I see it so much better.
What has become of your story club? I haven't heard you speak of it for a long time.
The story club isn't in existence any longer. We hadn't time for it, and anyhow I think we had got tired of it. It was silly to be writing about love and murder and elopements and mysteries. Miss Stacy sometimes has us write a story for training in composition, but she won't let us write anything but what might happen in Avonlea in our own lives, and she criticizes it very sharply and makes us criticize our own too. I never thought my compositions had so many faults until I began to look for them myself. I felt so ashamed I wanted to give up altogether, but Miss Stacy said I could learn to write well if I only trained myself to be my own severest critic, and so I am trying to.
Great.
You've only 2 more months before the entrance.
Follow me up
Said
to the
Marilla.
office and they'll
Do you
finish
think
your
you'll be able to get through?
Anne shivered. I don't know. Sometimes I think I'll be all right, and then I get horribly afraid. We've studied hard and Miss Stacy has drilled us thoroughly, but we mayn't get through for all that. We've each got a stumbling block. Mine is geometry, of course,
Head on in.
and Jane's is Latin, and Ruby and Charlie's is algebra, and Josie's is arithmetic. Moody Spurgeon says he feels it in his bones that he is going to fail in English history.
You'll have to be
Miss Stacy is going to give us examinations in June, just as hard as we'll have at the entrance, and mark us just as strictly, so we'll have some idea. I wish it was all over, Marilla. It haunts me. Sometimes I wake up in the night and wonder what I'll do if I don't pass,
Why go to school next year and try again?
said Marilla unconcernedly. Oh, I don't believe I'd have the heart for it. It would be such a disgrace to fail, especially if the others passed. And I get so nervous in an examination that I'm likely to make a mess of it. I wish I had nerves like Jane Andrews. Nothing rattles her. Anne sighed, and, dragging her eyes from the witcheries of the spring world, the beckoning day of breeze and blue, and the green things upspringing in the garden, buried herself resolutely in the book. There would be other springs, but if she did not succeed in passing the entrance, Anne felt convinced that she would never recover sufficiently to enjoy them. End of chapter 31.
One summer afternoon, your father gives you a choice of chores. What would you rather do? Your cousin has given you a very embarrassing nickname, and even worse, likes to call you it in front of your friends. You have asked him to stop, but he finds it very amusing to
Chapter 31 of Anne of Green Gables. Chapter 33 of Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is a... Chapter 32 of Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 32. The pass list is out. With the end of June came the close of the term, and the close of Miss Stacy's rule in Abingdon School.
lot of heated
Anne and Diana walked home that evening feeling very sober indeed. Red eyes and damp handkerchiefs bore convincing testimony to the fact that Miss Stacy's farewell words must have been quite as touching as Mr. Phillips's had been under similar circumstances 3 years before. Diana looked back at the schoolhouse from the foot of the spruce hill and sighed deeply.
It does seem as if it was the end of everything, doesn't it?
She said dismally. You oughtn't to feel half as badly as I do,
Your mother
said
sends
Anne,
you to the
hunting
market with a
vainly
list
for a
of
dry
goods
spot
to
on her
buy.
handkerchief.
After you
You'll be
finish,
back again next
you'll
winter.
find that
But
by
I suppose
mistake,
I've
the
left the dear
shopkeeper
old
has
school
given you
forever.
too much
If I have
money
good luck,
back
that
in
is.
exchange for one of the
It
items.
won't be a bit the same.
What do you
Miss Stacy won't be there, nor you, nor Jane, nor Ruby, probably. I shall have to sit all alone, for I couldn't bear to have another deskmate after you. Oh, we have had jolly times, haven't we, Anne?
While in
It's
a
dreadful to
marketplace, you
think
witness
they're all
a
over.
thief cut a
Two
purse
big
from a
tears
noble.
rolled down by
Even as
Diana's
he does
nose.
so, the noble notices
You
and
would stop
calls for
crying,
the
I
city
could,
guards.
said Anne
In his
imploringly.
haste to get away,
Just
the
as
thief
soon as I
drops
put
the
away my
purse.
hanky, I see you brimming up, and that starts me off
Surprisingly,
again.
no one seems to
As
notice
Mrs.
the
Lynde
bag of
says,
coins
if you
at your
can't be
feet.
cheerful, be as cheerful as
What
you
do
can.
you do?
After all, I dare say I'll be back next year. This is
Your
one of the
father
times
sent
I
you on a
know I'm not going
task
to
which
pass.
you loathe.
They're getting
Cleaning
alarmingly
the
frequent.
stables.
Why,
On the way there,
you came out
pitchfork in hand,
splendidly in the
you run
exams,
to your
Miss
friend from the
Stacy
homestead
did.
near your
Yes,
own.
but those exams didn't make me nervous. When I think of the real thing, you can't
Return for a
imagine what a
future favor
horrid,
of his
cold,
choosing.
fluttery feeling comes
What
round
do
my
you
heart.
do?
And then my number is 13, and Josie Pye says it's so unlucky. I am not superstitious, and I know it can make no difference. But still, I wish it wasn't 13,
I do wish I was going in with you.
said Diana.
Wouldn't we have a perfectly elegant time? But I suppose you'll have to cram in the evenings.
No, Miss Stacy has made us promise not to open a book at all. She says it would only tire and confuse us, and we are to go out walking and not think about the exams at all and go to bed early. It's good advice, but I expect it will be hard to follow. Good advice is apt to be, I think. Prissy Andrews told me that she sat up half the night every night of her entrance week
Your
and crammed
mother
for dear
asked you
life,
to help
and
fix
I
the
had determined
stove.
to sit up at
While
least
you're
as long as
working,
she
a
did.
very hot pipe
It was
slips
so
its
kind of her Aunt
moorings
Josephine
and
to ask me to
falls
stay at
towards
Beechwood
her.
while I'm in town.
What do you do?
You will write to me while you're in, won't you?
I'll write Tuesday night and tell you how the first day goes, promised Anne.
I'll be haunting the post office Wednesday.
know what I've
Vowed Diana. Anne went to town the following Monday, and on Wednesday Diana haunted the post office, as agreed, and got her letter. Dearest Diana, wrote Anne, Here it is Tuesday night, and I'm writing this in the library at Beechwood. Last
While
night
in
I was
town,
horribly
the
lonesome
baker
all
gives
alone
you a
in my
sweet
room,
roll.
and wished
You
so
like
much
it,
you were
you
with
take
me.
it into an alley
I couldn't
to
cram
enjoy.
because I'd
So
promised
we're
Miss
gonna
Stacy
get
not to.
Intercepted by a
But
gale
it was
After
as hard to
cleaning
keep from
all
opening
kids
my
your
history
age.
then
as
you've
it used to
nothing
be
to
to
fear.
reading a story before my
Or
lessons
else he
were
and his
over.
friends will beat
This
you
morning
and
Miss
take
Stacy
it.
came for me, and we went to the academy, calling for Jane and Ruby and Josie on our way. Ruby asked me to feel her hands, and they were as cold as ice. Josie said I looked as if I hadn't slept a wink, and she didn't believe I was strong enough to stand the grind of the teacher's course even if I did get through. There are times and seasons even yet when I don't feel that I've made any great headway in learning to like Josie Pye. When we reached the academy, there were scores of students there from all over
On a
the
clear
island.
day, you
The
chance
first
upon a
person we saw was
strange
Moody
animal.
Spurgeon sitting on the
It's
steps
laying
and
trap in
muttering
a
away to
hunter's claw
himself.
snare.
Jane
Judging
asked him
from
what
the
on earth he
bleeding,
was
it will
doing.
not
He
survive
said he
long.
was repeating the
One
multiplication
summer
table
afternoon,
over
your
and
father
over to
gives you a
steady his
choice of
nerves, and
chores.
for pity's sake not to
Your
interrupt
cousin
him,
has given you
because
a
if he stopped
very
for a moment he got
embarrassing
frightened and
nickname,
forgot
and there
everything
is
he ever
a
knew.
lot of
But the
heated discussion
multiplication
at the
table
local
kept all his
tavern.
facts
Your mother
firmly in
sends
their
you to
proper
the
place.
market with a list of
When we
goods
were
to
assigned to
buy.
our rooms, Miss
After
Stacy
you
had to leave
finish,
us.
you
Jane and
find
I
that
sat
by
together,
mistake a
and Jane
shopkeeper
was
has
so
given you
composed
too
that I envied
much
her.
money back
No
in
need of the
exchange for one of the
multiplication table
items.
for good, steady,
What
sensible
do
Jane.
you do?
I
While
wondered
in
if I
the
looked as I
marketplace,
felt,
you
and if they
witness
could hear my
a
heart
your
thumping
father
clear
sends you
across
on a
the room.
task which you loathe,
Then a man came
cleaning
in
the
and began
stables.
distributing the
On
English
the way there,
examination sheets.
pitchfork in hand,
My hands
you
grew
run into
cold
your
then,
friend from
and my
your
head
mother
fairly
asks
whirled
you to
around as
help
I picked
fix
it up.
while in
Just one
town,
awful
the
moment.
baker gives you a sweet
Diana, I
roll.
felt exactly
Still,
as I
on
did 4
entering
years
town,
ago
you
when I
find
asked
that
Marilla if I
you are
might stay
witness
at
to a
Green
very
Gables.
well-dressed
And
man
then everything
running from
cleared
a
up in my
crowd.
mind and my heart
He
began beating again.
screams to
I
you
forgot to
for
say that
help.
it had stopped
The
altogether,
crowd behind him
for I knew I
seems
could do
very
something with
angry.
that paper anyhow.
What do you do?
At noon we went home for dinner, and then back again for history in the afternoon. The history was a pretty hard paper, and I got dreadfully mixed up in the dates. Still, I think I did fairly well today. But oh, Diana, tomorrow the geometry exam comes off, and when I think of it, it takes every bit of determination I possess to keep from opening my Euclid. If I thought the multiplication table would help me any, I would recite it from now till tomorrow morning. I went down to see the other girls this evening. On my way, I met Moody Spurgeon wandering distractedly around. He said he knew that he had failed in history, and he was born to be a disappointment to his parents, and he was going home on the morning train, and it would be easier to be a carpenter than a minister anyhow. I cheered him up and persuaded him to stay to the end, because it would be unfair to Miss Stacy if he didn't. Sometimes I have wished I was born a boy, but when I see Moody Spurgeon, I'm always glad I'm a girl and not his sister. Ruby was in hysterics when I reached their boarding house. She had just discovered a fearful mistake she had made in her English paper. When she recovered, we went uptown and had an ice cream. How we wished you had been with us. Oh, Diana, if only the geometry examination were over. But there, as Mrs. Lynde would say, the sun will go on rising and setting whether I fail in geometry or not. That is true, but not especially comforting. I think I'd rather it didn't go on if I failed. Yours devotedly, Anne. The geometry examination and all the others were over in due time, and Anne arrived home on Friday evening, rather tired, but with an air of chastened triumph about her. Diana was over at Green Gables when she arrived, and they met as if they had been parted for years.
You old darling, it's perfectly splendid to see you back again. It seems like an age since you went to town, and oh, Anne, how did you get along?
Pretty well, I think, in everything but the geometry. I don't know whether I passed in it or not, and I have a creepy, crawly presentiment that I didn't. Oh, how good it is to be back. Green Gables is the dearest, loveliest spot in the world.
How did the others do?
The girls say they know they didn't pass, but I think they did pretty well. Josie says the geometry was so easy a child of 10 could do it. Moody Spurgeon still thinks he failed in history, and Charlie says he failed in algebra. But we don't really know anything about it, and won't until the pass list is out. That won't be for a fortnight. Fancy living a fortnight in such suspense. I wish I could go to sleep and never wake up until it is over. Diana knew it would be useless to ask how Gilbert Blythe had fared, so she merely said,
Oh, you'll pass all right, don't worry.
I'd rather not pass at all than not come out pretty well up on the list, flashed Anne, by which she meant, and Diana knew she meant, that success would be incomplete and bitter if she did not come out ahead of Gilbert Blythe. With this end in view, Anne had strained every nerve during the examinations. So had Gilbert. They had met and passed each other on the street a dozen times without any sign of recognition, and every time Anne had held her head a little higher, and wished a little more earnestly that she had made friends with Gilbert when he asked her, and vowed a little more determinedly to surpass him in the examination. She knew that all Avonlea Jr. was wondering which would come out first. She even knew that Jimmy Glover and Ned Wright had a bet on the question, and that Josie Pye had said there was no doubt in the world that Gilbert would be first, and she felt that her humiliation would be unbearable if she failed. But she had another and nobler motive for wishing to do well. She wanted to pass high for the sake of Matthew and Marilla, especially Matthew. Matthew had declared to her his conviction that she
would beat the whole island.
That, Anne felt, was something it would be foolish to hope for even in the wildest dreams. But she did hope fervently that she would be among the first 10 at least, so that she might see Matthew's kindly brown eyes gleam with pride in her achievement. That, she felt, would be a sweet reward indeed for all her hard work and patient rubbing among unimaginative equations and conjugations. At the end of the fortnight, Anne took to haunting the post office also, in the distracted company of Jane, Ruby, and Josie, opening the Charlottetown dailies with shaking hands and cold, sink-away feelings as bad as any experienced during the entrance week. Charlie and Gilbert were not above doing this too, but Moody Spurgeon stayed resolutely away.
I haven't got the grit to go there and look at a paper in cold blood,
He told Anne.
I'm just going to wait till somebody comes and tells me suddenly whether I passed or not.
When 3 weeks had gone by without the pass list appearing, Anne began to feel that she really couldn't stand the strain much longer. Her appetite failed, and her interest in Avonlea doings languished. Mrs. Lynde wanted to know what else you could expect with the Tory superintendent of education at the head of the affairs, and Matthew, noting Anne's paleness and indifference, and the lagging steps that bore her home from the post office every afternoon, began seriously to wonder if he hadn't better vote Grit at the next election. But one interesting news came. Anne was sitting at her open window, for the time forgetful of the woes of examinations and the cares of the world, as she drank in the beauty of the summer dusk, sweet-scented with flower breaths from the garden below, and sibilant and rustling from the stir of poplars. The eastern sky above the firs was flushed faintly pink from the reflection of the west, and Anne was wondering dreamily if the spirit of color looked like that, when she saw Diana come flying down through the firs, over the log bridge and up the slope, with a fluttering newspaper in her hand. Anne sprang to her feet, knowing at once what that paper contained. The pass list was out. Her head whirled and her heart beat until it hurt her. She could not move a step. It seemed an hour to her before Diana came rushing along the hall and burst into the room without even knocking, so great was her excitement.
"Anne, you've passed!"
she cried.
"Passed the very first! You and Gilbert both. Your ties, but your name is first. Oh, I'm so proud!"
Diana flung the paper on the table and herself on Anne's bed, utterly breathless and incapable of further speech. Anne lighted the lamp, oversetting the match safe and using up half a dozen matches before her shaking hands could accomplish the task. Then she snatched up the paper. Yes, she had passed. There was her name at the very top of a list of 200. That moment was worth living for.
"You did just splendidly, Anne,"
Puffed Diana, recovering sufficiently to sit up and speak, for Anne, starry-eyed and rapt, had not uttered a word.
"Father brought the paper home from Bright River not 10 minutes ago. It came out on the afternoon train, you know, and won't be here till tomorrow by mail. And when I saw the pass list, I just rushed over like a wild thing. You've all passed, every one of you, Moody Spurgeon and all, although he's conditioned in history. Jane and Ruby did pretty well, they're halfway up, and so did Charlie. Josie just scraped through with 3 marks to spare, but you'll see she'll put on as many airs as if she'd led. Won't Miss Stacy be delighted? Oh, Anne, what does it feel like to see your name at the head of a pass list like that? If it were me, I know I'd go crazy with joy. I am pretty near crazy as it is, but you're as calm and cool as a spring evening."
"I'm just dazzled inside," said Anne. "I want to say 100 things and I can't find words to say them in. I never dreamed of this. Yes, I did too, just once. I let myself think once, what if I should come out first? Quakingly, you know, for it seemed so vain and presumptuous to think I could leave the island. Excuse me a minute, Diana. I must run right out to the field to tell Matthew. Then we'll go up the road and tell the good news to the others." They hurried to the hayfield below the barn where Matthew was coiling hay. and, as luck would have it, Mrs. Lynde was talking to Marilla at the lane fence. "Oh, Matthew," exclaimed Anne, "I've passed and I'm first, or one of the first. I'm not vain, but I'm thankful,"
Well, now, I always said it.
said Matthew, gazing at the pass list delightedly.
Times me, you beat them all easy.
You've done pretty well, I must say, Anne.
said Marilla, trying to hide her extreme pride in Anne from Mrs. Rachel's critical eye. But that good soul said heartily,
I guess she's done well. Far be it from me to be backward and say. You're a credit to your friends, Anne, that's what. And we're all proud of you.
That night Anne, who had wound up the delightful evening with a serious little talk with Mrs. Allen at the manse, knelt sweetly by her open window in a great sheen of moonshine, and murmured a prayer of gratitude and aspiration that came straight from her heart. There was in it thankfulness for the past, and reverent petition for the future. And when she slept on her white pillow, her dreams were as fair and bright and beautiful as maidenhood might desire. End of chapter 32. Chapter 33 of Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. Chapter 33, The Hotel Concert.
Put on your white organdy by all means, Anne,
advised Diana decidedly. They were together in the East Gable chamber. Outside it was only twilight, a lovely yellowish-green twilight with a clear blue cloudless sky. A big round moon, slowly deepening from her pallid luster into burnished silver, hung over the haunted wood. The air was full of sweet summer sounds, sleepy birds twittering, freakish breezes, faraway voices and laughter. But in Anne's room the blind was drawn and the lamp lighted, for an important toilet was being made. The East Gable was a very different place from what it had been on that night 4 years before, when Anne had felt its bareness penetrate to the marrow of her spirit with its inhospitable chill. Changes had crept in, Marilla conniving at them resignedly, until it was as sweet and dainty a nest as a young girl could desire. The velvet carpet with the pink roses and the pink silk curtains of Anne's early visions had certainly never materialized, but her dreams had kept pace with her growth, and it is not probable she lamented them. The floor was covered with pretty matting, and the curtains that softened the high window and fluttered in the vagrant breezes were of pale green art muslin. The walls, hung not with gold and silver brocade tapestry, but with a dainty apple blossom paper, were adorned with a few good pictures given Anne by Mrs. Allen. Miss Stacy's photograph occupied the place of honor, and Anne made a sentimental point of keeping fresh flowers on the bracket under it. Tonight, a spike of white lilies faintly perfumed the room like the dream in the fragrance. There was no mahogany furniture, but there was a white painted bookcase filled with books, a cushioned wicker rocker, a toilet table befrilled with white muslin, a quaint, gilt-framed mirror with chubby pink cupids and purple grapes painted over its arched top that used to hang in the spare room, and a low white bed. Anne was dressing for a concert at the White Sands Hotel. The guests had got it up in aid of the Charlottetown Hospital, and had hunted out all the available amateur talent in the surrounding districts to help it along. Bertha Sampson and Pearl Clay of the White Sands Baptist Choir had been asked to sing a duet. Milton Clark of Newbridge was to give a violin solo, Winnie Adela Blair of Carmody was to sing a Scotch ballad, and Laura Spencer of Spencervale and Anne Shirley of Avonlea were to recite. As Anne would have said at one time, it was an epoch in her life, and she was deliciously athrill with the excitement of it. Matthew was in the seventh heaven of gratified pride over the honor conferred on his Anne, and Marilla was not far behind, although she would have died rather than admit it, and said she didn't think it was very proper for a lot of young folks to be gadding over to the hotel without any responsible person with them. Anne and Diana were to drive over with Jane Andrews and her brother Billy in their double-seated buggy. and several other Avonlea girls and boys were going too. There was a party of visitors expected out from town, and after the concert a supper was to be given to the performers. "Do you really think the organdy will be best?" queried Anne anxiously. "I don't think it's as pretty as my blue-flowered muslin, and it certainly isn't so fashionable,"
But it suits you ever so much better.
said Diana.
It's so soft and frilly and clingy. The muslin is stiff and makes you look too dressed up. But the organdy seems as if it grew on you.
Anne sighed and yielded. Diana was beginning to have a reputation for notable taste in dressing, and her advice on such subjects was much sought after. She was looking very pretty herself on this particular night, in a dress of the lovely wild rose pink, from which Anne was forever debarred. But she was not to take any part in the concert, so her appearance was of minor importance. All her pains were bestowed upon Anne, who, she vowed, must, for the credit of Avonlea, be dressed and combed and adorned to the Queen's taste.
Pull out that frill a little more. So. Here, let me tie your sash. Now, for your slippers. I'm going to braid your hair into 2 thick braids and tie them halfway up with big white bows. No, don't pull out a single curl over your forehead. Just have the soft cross. There's no way you do your hair suits you so well, Anne. And Mrs. Ellen says you look like a Madonna when you part it so. I shall fasten this little white house rose just behind your ear. There was just one on my bush, and I saved it for you.
"Shall I put my pearl beads on?" asked Anne. "Matthew brought me a string from town last week, and I know he'd like to see them on me." Diana pursed up her lips, put her black head on one side critically, and finally pronounced in favor of the beads, which were thereupon tied around Anne's slim and milk-white throat.
There's something so stylish about you, Anne,
said Diana, with unenvious admiration.
You hold your head with such an air. I suppose it's your figure. I'm just a dumpling. I've always been afraid of it, and now I know it is so. Well, I suppose I'll just have to resign myself to it.
"But you have such dimples," said Anne, smiling affectionately into the pretty, vivacious face so near her own. "Lovely dimples, like little dents in cream. I have given up all hope of dimples. My dimple dream will never come true, but so many of my dreams have, and I mustn't complain. Am I all ready now?"
All ready,
assured Diana, as Marilla appeared in the doorway, a gaunt figure with grayer hair than of yore and no fewer angles, but with a much softer face.
Come right in and look at our elocutionist, Marilla. Doesn't she look lovely?
Marilla emitted a sound between a sniff and a grunt.
She looks neat and proper. I like that way of fixing her hair. But I expect she'll ruin that dress driving over there in the dust and dew with it, and it looks most too thin for these damp nights. Organdy's the most unserviceable stuff in the world, anyhow, and I told Matthew so when he got it. But there is no use in saying anything to Matthew nowadays. Time was when he would take my advice, but now he just buys things for Anne regardless, and the clerks at Carmody know they can palm anything off on him. Just let them tell him a thing is pretty and fashionable, and Matthew plunks his money down for it. Mind you keep your skirt clear of the wheel, Anne, and put your warm jacket on.
Then Marilla stalked downstairs, thinking proudly how sweet Anne looked, with that one moonbeam from the forehead to the crown, and regretting that she could not go to the concert herself to hear her girl recite. "I wonder if it is too damp for my dress," said Anne anxiously.
Not a bit of it.
Said Diana, pulling up the window blind.
It's a perfect night, and there won't be any dew. Look at the moonlight.
"I'm so glad my window looks east into the sun rising," said Anne, going over to Diana. "It's so splendid to see the morning coming up over those long hills and glowing through those sharp fir tops. It's new every morning, and I feel as if I washed my very soul in that bath of earliest sunshine. Oh, Diana, I love this little room so dearly. I don't know how I'll get along without it when I go to town next month."
Don't speak of your going away tonight.
Begged Diana.
I don't want to think of it. It makes me so miserable. And I do want to have a good time this evening. What are you going to recite, Anne? And are you nervous?
"Not a bit. I've recited so often in public I don't mind at all now. I've decided to give the Maiden's Vow. It's so pathetic. Flora Spencer is going to give a comic recitation, but I'd rather make people cry than laugh.
What will you recite if they encore you?
They won't dream of encoring me, scoffed Anne, who was not without her own secret hopes that they would, and already visioned herself telling Matthew all about it at the next morning's breakfast table. There are Billy and Jane now. I hear the wheels. Come on. Billy Andrews insisted that Anne should ride on the front seat with him, so she unwillingly climbed up. She would have much preferred to sit back with the girls, where she could have laughed and chattered to her heart's content. There was not much of either laughter or chatter in Billy. He was a big, fat, stolid youth of 20, with a round, expressionless face, and a painful lack of conversational gifts. But he admired Anne immensely, and was puffed up with pride over the prospect of driving to White Sands with that slim, upright figure beside him. Anne, by dint of talking over her shoulder to the girls, and occasionally passing a sop of civility to Billy, who grinned and chuckled and never could think of any reply until it was too late, contrived to enjoy the drive in spite of all. It was a night for enjoyment. The road was full of buggies, all bound for the hotel, and laughter, silver clear, echoed and re-echoed along it. When they reached the hotel, it was a blaze of light from top to bottom. They were met by the ladies of the concert committee, one of whom took Anne off to the performers' dressing room, which was filled with the members of the Charlottetown Symphony Club, among whom Anne felt suddenly shy and frightened and countrified. Her dress, which, in the east gable, had seemed so dainty and pretty, now seemed simple and plain. Too simple and plain, she thought, among all the silks and laces that glistened and rustled around her. What were her pearl beads compared to the diamonds of the big, handsome lady near her? And how poor her one wee white rose must look beside all the hothouse flowers the others wore. Anne laid her hat and jacket away, and shrank miserably into a corner. She wished herself back in the white room at Green Gables. It was still worse on the platform of the big concert hall of the hotel, where she presently found herself. The electric lights dazzled her eyes, the perfume and hum bewildered her. She wished she were sitting down in the audience with Diana and Jane, who seemed to be having a splendid time away at the back. She was wedged in between a stout lady in pink silk and a tall, scornful-looking girl in a white lace dress. The stout lady occasionally turned her head squarely around and surveyed Anne through her eyeglasses until Anne, acutely sensitive of being so scrutinized, felt that she must scream aloud. And the white lace girl kept talking audibly to her next neighbor about the country bumpkins and rustic bells in the audience, languidly anticipating such fun from the displays of local talent on the program. Anne believed that she would hate that white lace girl to the end of life. Unfortunately for Anne, a professional elocutionist was staying at the hotel and had consented to recite. She was a lithe, dark-eyed woman in a wonderful gown of shimmering gray stuff like woven moonbeams, with gems on her neck and in her dark hair. She had a marvelously flexible voice and wonderful power of expression. The audience went wild over her selection. Anne, forgetting all about herself and her troubles for the time, listened with rapt and shining eyes. But when the recitation ended, she suddenly put her hands over her face. She could never get up and recite after that. Never. Had she ever thought she could recite? Oh, if she were only back at Green Gables. At this unpropitious moment, her name was called. Somehow Anne, who did not notice the rather guilty little start of surprise the white lace girl gave, and would not have understood the subtle compliment implied therein if she had, got on her feet and moved dizzily out to the front.
What of the girl?
She was so pale that Diana and Jane, down in the audience, clasped each other's hands in nervous sympathy. Anne was the victim of an overwhelming attack of stage fright. Often as she had recited in public, she had never before faced such an audience as this, and the sight of it paralyzed her energies completely. Everything was so strange, so brilliant, so bewildering. The rows of ladies in evening dress, the critical faces, the whole atmosphere of wealth and culture about her. Very different this from the plain benches of the debating club, filled with the homely, sympathetic faces of friends and neighbors. These people, she thought, would be merciless critics. Perhaps, like the white lace girl, they anticipated amusement from her rustic efforts. She felt hopelessly, helplessly ashamed and miserable. Her knees trembled, her heart fluttered, a horrible faintness came over her. Not a word could she utter, and the next moment she would have fled from the platform despite the humiliation which, she felt, must ever after be her portion if she did so. But suddenly, as her dilated, frightened eyes gazed out over the audience, she saw Gilbert Blythe away at the back of the room, bending forward with a smile on his face. A smile which seemed to Anne at once triumphant and taunting. In reality, it was nothing of the kind. Gilbert was merely smiling with appreciation of the whole affair in general, and of the effect produced by Anne's slender white form and spiritual face against a background of palms in particular. Josie Pye, whom he had driven over, sat beside him, and her face certainly was both triumphant and taunting. But Anne did not see Josie, and would not have cared if she had. She drew a long breath and flung her head up proudly, courage and determination tingling over her like an electric shock. She would not fail before Gilbert Blythe. He should never be able to laugh at her. Never, never. Her fright and nervousness vanished, and she began her recitation, her clear, sweet voice reaching to the farthest corner of the room without a tremor or a break. Self-possession was fully restored to her, and in the reaction from that horrible moment of powerlessness, she recited as she had never done before. When she finished, there were bursts of honest applause. Anne, stepping back to her seat, blushing with shyness and delight, found her hand vigorously clasped and shaken by the stout lady in pink silk.
My dear, you did splendidly,
she puffed.
I've been crying like a baby, actually I have. There, they're encoring you. They're bound to have you back.
Oh, I can't go, said Anne confusedly. But yet, I must, or Matthew will be disappointed. He said they would encore me.
Then don't disappoint Matthew,
said the pink lady, laughing. Smiling, blushing, limpid-eyed, Anne tripped back and gave a quaint, funny little selection that captivated her audience still further.